Good morning, everybody. I don't know if it's morning when you're watching this or not, but it's morning when I'm recording it, so I'm going to go with good morning because that's how I've always started my classes. So today our video is about the rise of Italian fascism and the rise of Benito Mussolini as the leader of Italy and as the creator of the fascist movement. So, for Italy, of course, when it comes to the rise of fascism, the place we have to start is with World War I. And if you remember, Italy was originally a member of the Central Powers. It was originally Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. But then when the war started in 1914, Italy chose not to declare war and not to get involved. However, Italy will eventually get involved on the side of the Triple Entente. So they join the Triple Entente and start fighting against the Central Powers. When that happens, the Ottoman Empire, of course, joins the Central Powers and creates that three-member Central European state to fight back against the Entente. But Italy joins, and they do serve bravely. They do have a lot of hard times during the war. The Caporetto campaign was particularly difficult. There's all kinds of battles in which Italian soldiers prove themselves to be very brave and very hardy and nationalistic and all that kind of stuff. And Italy feels like it really has paid a very large debt to become a major world power. And what they expect is they expected to be rewarded at the negotiations for the Treaty of Versailles with more land. They wanted to be a world empire. Now remember, Italy is a very young country. They only got unified in 1870. So they're looking to become, and they want to be seen as a major European power. So when they go to the negotiations for the Treaty of Versailles, of course, Vittorio Orlando is their negotiator, and he's really looking at getting as much as he can for Italy. Now, if we look at the map here that I've got pulled up, you can see that Italy does actually gain a little bit of territory, and particularly they gain a little bit of territory from Austria-Hungary. So they get Trieste, they get a little bit of Dalmatia. They want more, and they really expected and thought that they deserved more, but that's what Versailles gave them. And so when Italian soldiers come back home, one of the problems is, of course, there's a whole lot of people all of a sudden that are available to work. There's not a whole lot of jobs, and so there's a lot of people who are unemployed. They're living on the streets, they're poor, their economy's in ruins, not a whole lot's going very well. And on top of it, they have this kind of national humiliation of not being very well rewarded as a country for their participation in World War I. So fascism really starts with this disappointment over Versailles and over the outcome of World War I. And what we see is that under the Parti Nazionalissimo Fascisti, or the National Fascist Party, these guys, by and large, start off as kind of a World War I veterans club. And one of the things that would happen in this club is that World War I veterans could go there and they would help link them up with jobs. They would give them a place to stay for a few weeks. They would give them food. They would kind of try to help get them back on their feet. And one of the reasons that this was really useful was in northern Italy particularly, they had an industrial revolution going on, and because the Soviet Union was forming at this time, they were also sending out agents to try to start communist revolutions in other countries, including Italy. And so in a lot of these factories, you would have communists who would come and stage protests, and they would also sometimes call strikes. Well, if the guy who owned the factory didn't particularly want to lose his labor force to a communist-inspired strike, he didn't have a whole lot of options unless he joined the Fascist Party. If he joined the Fascist Party, one of the things he could do is he could go to his buddies at the National Fascist Party headquarters and say, listen, I've got some communists and they're trying to get my workers to go on strike. Is there anything you guys can do to help? And you're talking about a bunch of World War I trench fighters that have, literally been in hand combat for several years, and now all of a sudden you're asking them if they can go and end a strike. And of course, they're more than happy to do that as long as you give them a job. So the veterans got jobs. The capitalists got an end to their labor problems. The nationalists got to smush the communists. But of course, what this led to was a whole lot of street violence and a whole lot of really kind of ugliness between the Communist Party and the Fascist Party. Now, the Fascist Party was founded on three principles. Order, they said, things in society and people need to be controlled, and that's what the party is for. So they want order. Second, they want discipline. They want people to do what they are expected to do and to fit themselves into the order. Third principle of Italian fascism was hierarchy. They believed that there are leaders and there are followers and there are some people in between, but everyone should know their place and everyone should be obedient to their place to ultimately create this well-organized, very highly kind of militarized society. Those principles are going to propel them into power in the 1920s, but before they can do that, one of the things they have to do is they have to form themselves together as a national party, and eventually that's going to happen in 1921. One of the major components of this, though, is that the Italian Fascist Party is very, very willing to use violence to get their political means. And so they've got to have some kind of a group within the Fascist Party to do this violence. And of course, a lot of those guys are going to be made up of World War I veterans. These guys are called the squadristi, or the black shirts. These guys are basically like a street gang, except they got really nice uniforms, and they're fighting for national identity. They're fighting for their culture, they're fighting for their country to try to stop communism, which is, of course, always trying to invade and try to take control. So the squadristi, again, they're there to help capitalists keep their factories open, to try to keep the nation under control, and they get organized together into the Fascist Party. Now, eventually, the National Fascist Party becomes overtaken by a man named Benito Mussolini, who you can see here kind of in the middle. Mussolini ultimately was a huge critic of democracy, and he said democracy is bad because democracy doesn't work. Democracy doesn't accomplish huge things. In a democracy, it takes so long to decide on anything. By the time you decide what to do, there are two problems. Number one, it's taken you so long that the problem's not really a problem anymore. And number two, anything you do in a democracy requires a compromise. And Mussolini said, if there is a good answer and we need to compromise to get some kind of an answer, we might not get the good answer. So he ultimately said democracy is bad because democracy can't solve big problems. In October of 1922, Mussolini decides to show the other Italian people in his country that democracy doesn't work and that he can do better with his fascist party. And so in October of 1922, he organizes an event called the March on Rome. And basically what he does is he openly tells everybody in Italy, my black shirts and I are going to march right up to the front door of the government headquarters, and we're going to demand that they do something about it. And when they don't, that will prove to everybody that this democratic government doesn't work, and you should let us try a fascist government. So he starts out in the outskirts of Rome, and it takes a couple of days, and they march and they walk, and eventually, while they're marching, the government starts talking about this, and they start talking about how are we going to handle it, and what are we going to do, and how do we deal with Mussolini. Well, the problem is, while they're talking and while they're having committee meetings, Mussolini winds up right out in front of the headquarters of the government in Italy. When this happens, the thing you have to understand is Italy was a constitutional monarchy. And so when the government didn't do anything to stop Mussolini, the king ultimately stepped in and said, the government of our country can't solve a problem. I'm going to see if Mussolini can. And so King Victor Emmanuel III offers Mussolini the opportunity to form a government and to become the prime minister. This was totally legal. Mussolini didn't take power. He was granted power legally by the king. Now, one of the first things that he did was he decided that the Italian government had always had a problem since its very creation, and that problem was the Pope. If you remember, Italian unification took away the papal states from the Pope, and the Pope had, since 1870, told Italians, don't be loyal to your government, don't follow the rules, get away with what you can, but you definitely shouldn't be a loyal member of this particular society. So Mussolini says, listen, if I want to win over the Italian people, I've got to win over the Pope. So what am I going to do? In 1924, he goes to the Pope and he signs an agreement which is called the Lateran Accords. And the Lateran Accords basically is very simple. What happens is Mussolini gives the Catholic Church a whole bunch of apology money and recognizes that Vatican City is its own separate country that belongs to the Pope. In exchange, the Pope agrees to be supportive of Mussolini and to at least stop telling people not to follow his government and the Italian government. And also the Pope promises that if there's ever going to be a war in the future, he's going to remain politically neutral and he's going to stay out of it. Now that gives Mussolini a huge boost in popularity because all of a sudden there are Catholic priests all over Italy talking about what a good guy he is and talking about how great he is for their country. Now at the same time, what you have to understand is a lot of people that didn't like the fascists, particularly communists and anarchists, looked at Mussolini and said, we don't like him and we're going to show everybody that we don't like him and we're going to walk out of the national, what's basically Congress in Italy, so that when we walk out, it's going to be a protest that shows everybody how much we don't like Mussolini. The problem with that is Mussolini then calls a vote. And when he calls a vote, everybody who's left in the chamber is a fascist, which means he has a 100% approval rating inside of, again, what is basically Italian Congress. So when his enemies decided to walk out, they didn't hurt him in any way. What they did was they gave him a blank check to do whatever he wanted to, and basically what he became was a dictator. Now Mussolini here learns a very important lesson. If you want to be a dictator, you can't dress like this. You can't wear a suit and spats and highly shined shoes and look like a politician. If you want to be a dictator, you have to be more than just a government official. You have to be a real leader. And so what he does is he goes and takes some acting lessons, and he has a guy make him what's basically a costume, and he starts playing a political character that we refer to as Il Duce. I-L-D-U-C-E. Il Duce, which means the leader. Using the Il Duce character, he develops this kind of theatrical stage performance way of speaking and big movements of his arms, and he starts dressing in this kind of military style uniform. And really what he starts to do is he starts to militarize everything about the way society works. He starts to organize. He starts to impose that order. One of the things he does is he outlaws all other political parties so that there's no more debate, there's no more discussion. Things can just get done. One of the really critical things that Mussolini starts to do is he starts to take over education, and he replaces basically all of the schoolmasters, or we would think of them as superintendents and principals and things like that. He replaces all those people with members of the Fascist Party. And essentially what they do is they take control of education, and education goes from being something which is enlightened and kind of liberal to something which is much more focused on obedience and duty and training people to follow Il Duce and really getting everybody ready for this kind of anti-communist, anti-democracy, nationalism, order, and stability preferring kind of a country. And things do get better and things really do start to improve when it comes to Italy. But what you have to realize is this becomes what we call a totalitarian state, which means Mussolini has the power to influence the economy, the government, the military and police, the ideas, the culture, everything. His government really does become all-encompassing. Now, the other thing that's really interesting to look at here is the comparison between fascism and communism. Fascism, of course, looks at the goals of the nation. It is kind of ultra-nationalism, whereas communism is always going to be internationalist, at least almost always. We'll get to Stalin here in a little while, but it's almost always internationalist, right? They want to break down the barriers and create a uniform world working class. When it comes to fascists, they support a society which is defined by classes because the more you do for the nation, the more you should be rewarded with. Whereas communists, of course, want a society with zero classes of any kind. Fascists, of course, support complete and total dedication of yourself to the government, to the state, to the leader. Communists, of course, also believe that the state, the government, is the solution to all problems and that you have the obligation to be completely and totally loyal to the state. Both of them, of course, are willing to use terrorism and violence to achieve power. Both of them are very, very appealing when it comes to economic downturn, and both of them are ruled by a small group of very politically elite people. So really the one thing that they disagree on is nationalism and classes, and whether it's good or whether it's bad. But otherwise, the two ideologies are very, very similar to each other in terms of the total power of the government and what we call totalitarianism. So next time I talk to you guys, it's going to be about Stalin's Soviet Union, how he takes over, and what he does within the Soviet Union to turn it into a communist, capital C communist, or Stalinist state. So I hope everybody's staying healthy. I hope everybody is staying safe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.